Sawadika. Good morning, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, and to all participants. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. I'm really delighted to be a keynote speaker here today and over the coming days at the 5th International Conference for Highway Engineering in beautiful Thailand, and to also share this keynote presentation with my colleague Patrick Mallejacq, the Secretary General of PIARC. Now, we titled this presentation today On the Road to Resilience because in many countries, work is being done to address the climate change challenges which are posed across the road sector, but more still needs to be done. And I think we can all agree on this. So we're faced with increased frequency and intensity of weather events, and this results in not only impacts on our infrastructure itself, but also on people in the community, their safety, and also economic and social recovery. So in this keynote today, I'll provide an overview of sustainability and resilience issues in Australia and also across PIARC. I'll then hand you across to Patrick, who will then talk about some PIARC activities around resilience in further detail. So my presentation today will first of all provide an overview of some of the sector-specific challenges due to climate change events. I'll then speak about some key projects which have just been published from the organisation which I work at, Infrastructure Victoria, on building a case for adaptation so that we can make infrastructure more resilient both now and also into the future. I'll also cover some decarbonisation advice which we provided through the Victorian Government, looking at ways that we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Then I'll turn the attention across to address climate change at a global level, and we'll share some work from PIARC, in particular one of the technical committees that I was involved in over the last 4 years. Finally, I'll then provide some case study examples of the application of a range of approaches to deal with climate change that are being adopted internationally. So, as we all know, there are many challenges due to climate change hazards that are occurring worldwide. Some examples of this include the occurrence of floods, roadside inundation, typhoons, cyclones, hurricanes, bushfires, and also other hazards such as rising sea levels, landslides, and also drought. These all lead to changes in the road sector and challenges for the road sector, for the infrastructure, but also for network operations. So, for example, in the incidence of greater road flooding, this places pressure on the drainage systems and causes infrastructure failures, pavement saturation, can also cause things like bridge scour and deterioration of the water quality as a result of water runoff from the roads and sedimentation. This can also result in challenges in network operations, such as the increase in accidents, weather-related delays, road closures, traffic disruptions, and a greater need for emergency services. So this is emergency services to get people out of a region in danger and also get the emergency services in to repair the infrastructure. So these extreme events can also expand beyond the road sector itself and impact on other sectors such as telecommunications, energy and power, access to hospitals. All of these sectors, as we know in the real world, are all interrelated. And in times of crisis, when one is impacted, this can have a flow-on impact on other sectors. And I'm sure that you've seen many of these sort of occurrences in your own countries. So at Infrastructure Victoria, we're really conscious of the impacts and also these types of interrelationships. So a little bit about who we are. We're an independent advisory body, part of the Victorian State Government. So I'm located in Melbourne, and those of you who are familiar with the map of Australia, I'm on the east side, down towards the bottom of Australia. Now, we conduct research on infrastructure issues, and we also provide advice to all the state government departments on infrastructure matters. Now, we have three core functions, the first of which is to prepare Victoria's 30-year infrastructure strategy. So this provides a practical roadmap of actions and recommendations for the Victorian Government to take over the next 30 years. So the scope extends beyond climate change and sustainability to also include better ways to plan and manage the future, ways to manage urban density challenges, also to concentrate investment on where it can do the most good, and to enable infrastructure services to meet future demands. We also have another function to provide independent advice to the government, sometimes at the request of our Victorian Treasurer. We also undertake our own independent research on topics that can assist the Victorian Government carrying out its work. So earlier this year we published 2 reports, and I'll speak a little bit more about these in the presentation today. The first of which is an adaptation project called Weathering the Storm, and the second is our decarbonisation advice piece, which seeks to look at opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from infrastructure. So first, I would like to focus on the adaptation work as an example of what can be done to help value and embed resilience more deeply into our existing processes. So we all know that more needs to be done, but there are sometimes challenges with how we go about doing this. So this relates to one of our strategy recommendations, and this was to conduct a strategic review of the consequences of climate change for infrastructure. So in this work, we aim to understand the climate change challenges for sectors and the types of interventions that can be put in place to enable better decisions to be made. So in particular in this piece of work, we examined how departments are assessing resilience, and we took a statewide longer term view to assess climate change risks, and also to look at things like how do we undertake a geospatial mapping exercise to essentially look at the hotspots across Victoria, the areas of vulnerability for multiple different types of sectors, such as the road sector, also electricity transmission and distribution networks, and for hospitals. So we looked at the vulnerabilities across a range of different types of hazards, and then for the highest risks, we undertook an economic assessment of the different types of interventions that can be put in place to enable better decisions to be made. So our work really provides a toolkit to make the best choices on how to invest and make infrastructure more resilient and stronger when these events occur. Because we can't stop these types of events from occurring, but what we can do is we can reduce the impacts when they do occur. So we identified in our research that infrastructure was not built for the more frequent and extreme climate events that are hitting our infrastructure, and our infrastructure is exposed to a greater extent. And we're really experiencing this in real time, and if we don't take more action, our infrastructure will fail more, causing more harm and disruptions. So we therefore need to be better prepared. We need to be more proactive rather than reactive. So as a result, early adaptation action is really needed to help reduce the risk of damages and also the harm to communities and the cost of repair and recovery. So we've found that there is a real opportunity for the Victorian Government and for other governments as well to increase the prioritisation of adaptive action to avoid the more frequent failures to infrastructure and that result from these climate change impacts. We also found that there is a lot of effort which is going into the recovery of disasters rather than adaptation ahead of them. So for example, extreme weather events are hitting our infrastructure, and it's costing us about $3 billion in Australian dollars each year on recovery efforts. Now this will only increase, putting more pressure then on the system. So we also found that for every dollar that the government spends, there's only about 3 cents of every dollar that is being spent on prevention. So we're always finding that we're in recovery mode. We're always dealing with the disasters as they occur. But there is a real opportunity to shift the balance which we place with our investments. So, for example, do we keep on spending the $3 billion every year on cleanup, or do we spend a little bit more now to reduce those impacts later on? The trick is we do have a lot of infrastructure and we can't do everything everywhere all at once. Throughout our analysis, we've found that you don't have to harden all of your infrastructure. You don't have to gold plate all of your infrastructure. This is actually impossible in reality. So adaptation interventions can therefore be put in place in targeted areas in more cost-effective ways, where the lower cost options can be effective also in reducing hazards. So infrastructure can be adapted in many different types of ways. Adaptation measures don't have to be expensive or involve the large rebuilds and those large big build projects. Sometimes these are necessary, but in other circumstances, the big build adaptations aren't necessarily the best way to do this. Sometimes it's the lower cost measures, such as changing the type and the frequency of preventative maintenance activities. Also things like nature-based solutions or making changes in asset management standards. There are also low-cost ways of reducing the severity of climate change risks, such as managing vegetation to reduce the chance of vegetation falling on power lines when you have high wind events. It's also the ability to not completely avoid a flood, but to be able to recover quickly so the road is not washed away, or implement bushfire management plans which reduce downtime after landslides. It can also be the ability to upgrade incrementally over time and to use materials and designs that also reduce greenhouse gas emissions and embodied energy, or to build infrastructure in safer and less hazardous locations if this is possible. We also found that adaptation action really needs to be tailored for the type of infrastructure that is in place. It's not a cookie-cutter, one-size-fits-all solution. There are quite specific different climate change risks for different types of assets and also in different places. And this makes it challenging to assess, but also shows that better information and guidance is needed on how to assess this, and this is really important to infrastructure managers. Infrastructure managers should carefully assess the local conditions and decide whether specific adaptation measures are suitable. They can do this by conducting climate risk assessments and to then select the best measures that reduce the risks of climate change for these high-risk vulnerable locations. Then also the testing of adaptation measures. This is highly site-specific. They can vary by location, also the age of the infrastructure, the type of infrastructure, and also some of the functional requirements of the infrastructure. So what might work in one location and be effective may not work in another location. And it's things like maladaptation. So it's the unintended consequences of implementing an adaptation measure that really need to be avoided. So localised assessment is really essential. So we undertook three economic assessments for 20 different adaptation measures all up. And we did this for 2 road examples, and the third was for electricity distribution networks in urban and also in rural locations. So we wanted to use a similar type of assessment to show that this sort of assessment can work for different sectors. And we also wanted to have a methodology that could be easily repeated. So to help us select which types of adaptation measures are suitable, what we did was we categorised these into those adaptation measures which were the higher cost. So these are like the large-scale projects requiring construction of infrastructure. Also lower cost solutions, like I've just mentioned, the nature-based solutions, maintenance activities. So this is increasing periodic maintenance and preventative maintenance. And then we also had another category around hazard management solutions. So this is the early warning systems and also things like temporary structures. So in this, we apply quite a lot of PIARC research from one of the technical committees, and this really greatly assisted us in developing our methodology and adapting it for the suitability for the Victorian context. Now, as you can see for the flood events, what we did was we looked at a flood-prone road in an urban area, and this was to look at the damages to roads as a result of these events. We also looked at a hypothetical example for the impacts of bushfires and landslides on the accessibility of roads in regional locations. And we have real-life examples of where all of these incidences are occurring. And finally, we had an example looking at energy infrastructure and the impacts of high winds on electricity distribution lines. So we found through our economic analysis that there are benefits in investing in resilient infrastructure, and these can actually outweigh the cost of repairing and rebuilding after extreme weather events. We showed that it is possible to deliver positive returns on investment, and some of these options actually cost very little. So for example, with flood-prone roads, we found that preventative maintenance is one technique that provided the highest return on investment, both in current conditions and also in future conditions. In fact, for all of the examples that we looked at, it was actually the lower cost measures that showed the highest return on investment in our cost-benefit analysis. And so this is really something that was very good news to our government. The other point that I wanted to make is that the economic analysis that we conducted is something that was actually quite unique. What we did was we considered different types of analysis that have been conducted internationally, and this also included across PIARC, and we incorporated this into our methodology that we wanted to use to assess the economic impacts. So we had things like looking at the embodied emissions around the adaptation measures, how much emissions is caused as a result of implementing these adaptation measures. We also considered maladaptation as well in the selection of the types of adaptation measures that we assessed, and we also looked at things like adaptation pathways. So this is where you can bundle different types of adaptation measures together or apply them over time in a sequenced way. So this work is really a perfect example of how projects can benefit by looking at what is happening elsewhere and then incorporating those into the suitability for the local context for the project that you're looking at. So following this economic assessment and also looking at the risks of climate change hazards, we developed 7 different types of recommendations for the Victorian Government to better assess and prepare the infrastructure to climate change. So this was to show how adaptation could be embedded into normal government processes. So we wanted to make sure that our suggestions were things that could be easily adopted. They weren't requiring the development of a whole set of new guidelines, for example. It was the add-ons to the existing processes, because we are very aware that resources are limited, finances are also limited. So with these recommendations, we covered the need to prioritise resilience more in our climate change strategies, and to also make sure that the responsibilities of adaptive actions across our government departments are clear, and also that there is the regular publication of the progress towards adaptive action. We also had a focus on data and the need to provide more clarity around this, given it was one of the challenges that was identified by infrastructure managers in our project. The problem is that there is a lot of data out there, and sometimes it can be really difficult to know what type of data to then use for risk assessments. So this is particularly looking at climate change projections. So we're suggesting using a more standardised approach for climate change projections. This can help provide more consistency in the way the risk assessments are undertaken, and it can provide a common baseline of data used. We also looked at things like using asset management systems and to make improvements around that to improve also resilience. We had examples also looking at business case guidance and looking at the updates that are needed to ensure that the climate change risks are considered more deeply into investment decision making. This is to help departments better equip themselves for how to undertake a vulnerability assessment. How do you look at the likelihood and the consequence of events? What type of adaptive actions do you consider? And how do you embed all of these into government decision-making processes? Finally, the real issue is that we could do all of this work, but there needs to be confidence that there's money at the end to bring about these adaptive improvements. We're seeing around the world that there are different places that are making progress towards climate adaptation, and they're putting forward dedicated sets of funds for adaptation. So these funds are actually separate to the maintenance and also the recovery funding. And it's to provide more reassurance that if you do all of this work, then the adaptation measures that are deemed the most important can be implemented. So there are two sides to the climate story. One is the adaptation side, the other side is the mitigation and the decarbonisation. So I just wanted to talk really briefly about our second publication. So we know that climate change, it really threatens our future, not only in Victoria, but also globally. There are up to 70% of Australia's annual emissions are attributed to infrastructure, and new infrastructure projects do consume enormous amounts of energy and materials. There is a lot of pressure on the construction and materials industry to bring about decarbonisation, and this is increasing. But there are also ways to reduce climate emissions from infrastructure, and this can lead to cost savings and improvements to productivity. Using things also like recycled materials can deliver cost savings and benefits to the economy. So we're looking at different ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to better value and measure climate change and to provide industry with more options. So here is just a snippet of what's in our decarbonisation report, but it talks about things like prioritising non-build and also low-build solutions. So the aim of this is to get better use from existing infrastructure, to modify it to meet the changing needs before considering a new build. This can also help avoid emissions with constructing and operating new infrastructure where this is required. And where the big builds are needed, there are considerations of using construction techniques like off-site or modular construction wherever possible. There are many benefits that can be achieved by aligning approaches between governments and also industry best practices. This can reduce the need of investing and developing new solutions from scratch. And this is if techniques can be shared across industry and also to help build capacity. There's also the need for immediate and sustained action in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So while there are a lot of emission targets that are in place, there are still opportunities to establish more clarity around the timescales for decarbonisation. And as of last week, our Australian government released a set of national carbon emission measurement guidelines. And this is to provide more consistent approaches to measure embodied emissions across all state jurisdictions. Now, I just wanted to quickly turn the attention towards climate change at a global level. PIARC has been involved in climate change and resilience for over a decade now. So in 2015, the International Climate Change Adaptation Framework for Road Infrastructure was developed. The aim of this document was to guide road authorities through the process of increasing resilience of their networks and assets. And it's really been designed to be applicable at any scale. So at the national scale, the regional scale, the local and also asset-specific level. Now, following this work after this first document was developed, PIARC have developed a number of other reports. One of these is the collection of different case studies on adaptation methodologies and strategies to increase the resilience of road infrastructure. And the other is to look at the refinements to the 2015 framework. So this was looking at all the changes that are needed to update it in further cycles. So following this work, under PIARC Technical Committee 1.4, Climate Change and Resilience of Road Networks in the last cycle, this was actually a committee that I had the privilege of chairing over the last 4 years. We produced 5 different reports throughout the cycle. So these range from a terminology report, and this was put together to look at the coordination of resilience across a number of other PIARC technical committees, because resilience is seen to be a cross-cutting issue. We also developed a case study report, as well as the development of another report together with Technical Committee 1.5 Disaster Management. And this was to reflect the outcomes from a seminar that was held in Yogyakarta in Indonesia in 2022. Now, I'll actually speak a little bit more about this particular piece of work through REAAA tomorrow. There will be a special REAAA session that will be held on climate change and resilience, and I'll talk about some of the key themes coming out of this seminar further at that session. Now, the last 2 reports that you can see here, these really showcase the ultimate work of PIARC Technical Committee 1.4 throughout the 4 years. The first is a new updated version of the PIARC framework, the International Climate Change Framework for Road Infrastructure, and the other is to look at uniform and holistic approaches to climate change. So it's also looking at other types of hazards like man-made hazards, natural hazards, cybersecurity threats. So these are both available on the PIARC website. Now, just quickly in terms of the updated version of the Climate Change Adaptation Framework. So we looked at what was done in previous cycles, and that really provided a strong foundation for developing the updated version. We also looked at examples of systematic implementation of the framework, so parts of the framework that are being considered in other parts of the world. And we collected case studies. So all up, we collected 70 different case studies from 24 countries to reflect the updated research and experience. Now, some of the features of the PIARC framework are that this new framework is quite broad in terms of its applicability. Special consideration has been given to low middle income countries and, of course, also high income countries as well. So it also has that flexibility where not one specific method or pathways is advised. It's rather a menu of different types of options that can be considered depending on your level of advancement to climate change adaptation in your country. It also incorporates iterations of adaptation. So each outcome is a new starting point and has that compatibility. So it is important to build on the information that you already have. And in the updated framework, it also covers other issues that are being developed that have been developed in further detail around criticality of infrastructure and adaptive capacity. And this is what the framework looks like, essentially. It's in four steps. So the first stage looks at the preparation, so defining the purpose, the aims and the scope and the baselines for your project. Then it looks at stage 2 with assessment pathways. So looking at how to undertake vulnerability assessments, risk assessments, resilience assessments, and how to score and prioritise these risks. The third stage then looks at the evaluation, so looking at different types of adaptation measures that can be put in place to respond to these risks and how to assess these using a range of different methodologies. That might be through life cycle costing assessment or a cost-benefit analysis or multi-criteria analysis. And then the fourth stage is integrating all of these findings into decision-making processes. And this can also include things like adaptation action plans. Now, I just wanted to quickly go through 4 different types of case studies. So the first of which shows how climate projections can be standardised in order to aid decision making. This is not just for the road sector, but also for other sectors as well. And you'll see that this is quite familiar with one of the recommendations that we developed in our Infrastructure Victoria report for weathering the storm. So here in Ireland, the Meteorological Service have developed a national set of standardised future climate projections, and these are intended to be accessible to all users. Another example is once you have the data that you want to use for your assessment, this then looks at how to incorporate this into a vulnerability assessment. So this case study is actually from the Institute of Transportation in Mexico, and it uses a GIS methodology to identify the sections of the roads exposed to climate change. It also provides a really good decision base for working out where there is exposure on the network and mapping these exposure sites to potential vulnerabilities that need to be dealt with. You'll also see that this is a similar approach to what we undertook in our Infrastructure Victoria report, where we undertook a geospatial analysis. So this is also another example of using other research, using other case studies and incorporating that into the work for your organisation. So the next case study is on the Icarus project, and this is an example of how climate change adaptation can be implemented into decision-making guidelines. So the Conference of European Directors of Roads have initiated this Icarus project. It's been found that there are some challenges with, once frameworks are developed, it can be difficult to then assess the impacts of climate change, because some find that fully embedding these frameworks can be difficult. This is maybe because the staff don't know how to use the frameworks or in their ordinary work, or how to build the case for adaptation. Often it can be seen that there are challenges in identifying the appropriate data, also dedicating the capacity and resources to this. So the aim of this work is to identify current barriers and gaps in the application of resilience assessments and make suggestions on how to overcome these. Now, the very last case study is about funding. This work is from Canada, and it's also something that we use for our Infrastructure Victoria recommendations. So this is where we're seeing in many countries, as I mentioned earlier, there are dedicated buckets of funds that are for adaptation, and these are separate to the maintenance and recovery funding. So in Canada, they've launched a national climate strategy which is supporting adaptation with dedicated financial resources. It's investing over $3 billion Canadian dollars in more than 80 different types of projects, and this is to help ensure that climate measures are being funded and implemented to reduce the risk of climate change events. So as you can see, it's really beneficial to share the work between countries so that we can build off knowledge and also to help tackle these types of challenges. It's at conferences like this over the yesterday and also today and tomorrow that are really a perfect example of creating a platform, of sharing information so that we can bring this back and also adapt it for our projects, and that also forms a way of sharing information. So I'd now like to hand across to Patrick, who will speak about some PIARC activities in further detail. Thank you so much for your time and also for the opportunity to present on some of our work. Thank you.
Sawadee clap. Good morning, everyone, distinguished guests, dear colleagues and friends, all protocol observed. My name is Patrick Mallejacq, Secretary General of the World Road Association. It's a pleasure to be here, and I wanted to thank our colleagues at the Department of Highways and at the Road Association of Thailand for the invitation to take part in this prestigious event and in this session this morning. Thank you very much, Caroline, for this first part of our session this morning. You're the expert, and part of my job is to support experts internationally. I really appreciate the work that you are committing to PIARC, and I also wanted to highlight that as a woman, and for Caroline and myself as a man, we have been able to achieve some sort of gender balance in this session, and this is very important at PIARC. We really aim to have as many women take part in our activities in particular. So what is PIARC? So you've seen our logos, and you may even have been visiting our stand just behind this wall. We are the World Road Association. We were founded in 1909 with one role, which is to be the global forum for the exchange of knowledge on everything that's related to roads and road transport. We welcome high-income countries as well as low and middle-income countries in all our activities. Our lead members are 128 member governments, including Thailand, of course. And the way we work is to mobilize the expertise of colleagues from all over the world who have volunteered by their governments to join our technical committees. So thank you very much to all of them and to our colleagues from committees 1.1 and 3.1 on road safety and organizations in particular who are here with us today. In some countries, we even have national level committees, which we call national committees, and as you saw yesterday, we welcome just yesterday the Thailand Road Association as the 50th National Committee, and we very much look forward to working with the network of experts in Thailand so that they can be more involved in our activities and so that we can promote more and learn more from them as well. At PIARC, we are a global organization covering the world, or almost. So we need to establish priorities to structure the way we're going to do across a number of years. For the last cycle, which ended last year, we identified a number of cross-cutting issues that were relevant for all countries. This included innovation, safety, as well as climate change and infrastructure and network resilience. Caroline has presented that. What has happened over 4 years is that we have been able to publish more than 90 reports covering the whole range of topics from road safety to bridges to tunnels and to resilience and adaptation to climate change. I have highlighted a few here on the screen, and you can flash this QR code if you want. It will direct you to a web page where you can download the reports for free, actually. Even if you're not members of the association, you can click on that QR code and you can download reports from our website. As you can see, we've analyzed how to undertake well-prepared projects. We've analyzed diversity and talent management in transport administrations. We've analyzed how to green freight transport and how to use recycled materials in pavements. So I'm sure all of you have interest in one or more of these topics, so please go and check. We've also organized numerous international events. It's a good thing that reports are available from a website. It's even better to promote them locally where they matter and where experts in a country or in a region will be able to learn more, but also to share with us their local expertise so that we can embed that wealth of experience from Thailand, from Indonesia, as Caroline mentioned, in our future reports. So we've organized congresses, conferences on pavement characteristics and on tunnels operations and safeties, as well as more focused seminars in Indonesia, Malaysia, India, Tunisia. And this is also why we're very happy to be here this week in Malaysia with our seminar on transport administrations and the transport administration of the future, and our workshop on road safety. And we look forward to coming back to Thailand for more similar events. In some cases, we also outsource projects with funding provided by our member countries. And as I have highlighted here on this screen, a few that are related to resilience. Resilience is not only adapting to climate change and disasters, but it's also adapting to man-made disasters, such as overloaded vehicles or oversized vehicles. We've also worked on innovation policies, on all the work that the road sector does to contribute to carbon neutrality, and we're now working on rapid disaster impact assessment after disasters have struck, and this report will be available later this year. Congresses is how it all started with PIARC, and last year we organized the 27th World Road Congress. It was a major event with more than 4,000 delegates from more than 120 countries. Basically, the whole world, everyone who was interested in roads was there. And in case you missed it, I invite you to check our Congress proceedings. They're available as a website, again, and there you can find all the session presentations, all the conclusions, articles from the call for papers, some pictures as well, of course. And there's a wealth of knowledge there, including many articles from authors related to resilience, adaptation to climate change, and decarbonization. Some of the reports we have published over the years include focuses on resilience. Caroline has mentioned the work that her committee has delivered over the last years, but please note that our committee on disaster management has also worked on the financial aspects of disaster management and how to prepare and how to mitigate and how to give recommendations to decision makers and financial departments. They've also worked on how to use big data and social networks for disaster management, both as a way to identify and measure the disasters and as a way to inform the public and people who use transportation networks. Other committees have worked on freight and how to avoid overloading and how to avoid infrastructure damage on road networks. A task force has worked on electric road systems, which is a path to net zero. Other committees have worked on asset management and how to improve the resilience of the road network, regarding pavements in particular, with several measures that have been identified depending on the type of pavements. So I really encourage you to check all these reports. And if bridge fails, which unfortunately happens sometimes, we also have guidelines and recommendations on how to analyze from a forensic point of view what has happened, as well as earth structures. Sometimes earth structures and earthworks can be an overlooked subject. No longer with us. We have 16 case studies that will be enlightening, I'm sure, for many of us. But if you look at the future, this year 2024 sees the start of a new work cycle. This is a list of our committees. I'm not suggesting you read this detailed slide. I just want to share with you that if you want to be engaged in the activities of any of those committees, please let us know, and we'll be very happy to work with you and with your colleagues in Thailand to welcome you in those committees, because you, the experts, are the people we work with to develop this knowledge and to share this knowledge across the world. As you can see here, we have a focus on decarbonization, which is a new focus for us, but we have kept working on resilience. Those green stars there highlight the committees that continue working on resilience. So please continue checking what we do in PIARC, contribute case studies, contact us if you want to join those committees, or even if you're not able to join and commit to working for a 4-year cycle. You tell us, hey, in my country, in my province in Thailand, I'm doing this to improve resilience. Maybe that's interesting for you, and we will be very, very happy to embed this in our future work. Speaking of the future, and this will be my last slide, we continue organizing events and congresses, and I invite all of you to France, which happens to be my country, in March 2026, where we will organize the 17th World Congress on winter roads. So maybe winters in Thailand are quite different from winters in France, Italy, or Germany. Fine. But this Congress has been broadened to include road resilience and even road decarbonization. So it's going to be relevant for every country. We have just published the call for papers, and I'm sure many in the room and many in Thailand will be eager to present abstracts, and so as to be invited to come to France to present your expertise there. And then, of course, later on in October 2027, it's in Vancouver that we will meet for the big Congress, where we will present the conclusions of all the work that we have done over 4 years. That was a bit quick, but if you want more information on our activities and all that we do in resilience, please feel free to contact me, to contact our colleagues, to come to our booth here on the exhibition stand, or to contact us by email. Thank you very much again to the hosts, to the organizers, and to my colleagues in PIARC technical committees.